Hello again, everybody. This is Rusty, aka William, aka Dr. Robinson, and I am the Blues Doctor. Welcome to my podcast. We're glad you're here. You may notice we're not in our regular studio this week. My producer and I are on the road in my old hometown of Memphis, Tennessee. So we're in a little bit different environment and the circumstances are a little different. You may also notice I'm wearing my Tulane Angry Wave t-shirt because the Tulane football team is now 3-1, and they're playing this afternoon against University of Tulsa in Tulsa, and we want to get this recording done so that we can catch the game. So like and subscribe and share and ring the bell and all those things, and let's get to it so we don't miss the game. For the calendar this week, we've actually got two items. The first for September 25th from the year 1980. And that was when the drummer for Led Zeppelin, John Bonham, died after consuming the equivalent of 40 shots of vodka in about a 5-hour period before he was starting on their next U.S. tour. Bonzo, which was his nickname, had been an intrinsic part of Zeppelin from the very beginning. And the rest of the band decided after his death that they couldn't really go on without him. So they disbanded at that point. Bonham is thought by many people to be the greatest or most influential rock drummer of all time. And in fact, in 2016, Rolling Stone magazine named him as the #1 drummer on its list of the 100 greatest drummers of all time. Our next item on the calendar, September 21st, and this time in 1978. Do you remember the 21st night of September? Well, I bring that up partly because we're in Memphis this week, and partly because that's the first line of Earth, Wind, and Fire's song called September Song. And when it was written, it was not intended to be about any particular season. It just sounded good, according to Maurice White, who is another Memphis boy who grew up here. He went to Booker T. Washington High School in Memphis. Some of his classmates included Booker T. Jones of Booker T. and the MGs and David Porter, who went on to become one of the in-house writers for Stax Records. In fact, Maurice once said, "Me, David, and Booker had a pretty hot band for high school." Anyway, Earth, Wind, and Fire went on to win 6 Grammy Awards, and they sold almost 100 million records, and they made the 21st night of September pretty famous. For our medicine segment this week, I'd like to continue the series we started last week, which I have titled Medicine versus MAGA 2025. As you might remember, last week we started this series about the conflict between the Make America Great Again movement and science in general and medicine in particular. We discussed some of the specific trends or events that I believe have contributed to this conflict. The question today that we're going to try to answer is how can that conflict be resolved? What can we do on both sides of the argument, maybe to better understand each other? I spent a lot of time last week naming and explaining those 5 different events or trends that I think had contributed to the problem. And I promise I won't go over them in detail again because it took a lot of time, but I would like to bring up some possible solutions. So here's a list I'll refer to. Number 1, healthcare dysfunction. Right off the bat, I think this may be the most difficult problem and the most painful to deal with. I've come to believe that our current for-profit system is just not functional anymore. When medicine was simpler and there was far less money concerned, it was probably a reasonable thing. Not anymore. The U.S. healthcare system today looks nothing like the system from prior to World War II. Here's what I think it boils down to. Most Americans would probably agree that medicine is somewhere between a commodity on one side and a right on the other. In other words, we're not going to let people, in the United States, we're not going to let people die in the street. That's just not going to happen. At the same time, everybody can't get everything they possibly want because it would bankrupt the entire nation. So what do? Somehow we have to figure out a way to find the sweet spot, the point in the middle where all this works. And the only way I know of to do that is via some kind of centralized financial program for medicine. and don't get upset, let me explain this a little bit. I think the best solution would be what some people have called a single payer system. Let me explain it now. The single payer is not the same thing as single provider system. In the US, the VA or Veterans Administration hospitals are a good example of the single provider system. That means all of the providers, all of the hospitals, everything else associated with the system is all owned by one entity. They're all paid on a contracted basis with that entity, and they can't work anywhere else. That's a single provider system where they control everything. A single payer system is something more like Medicare as it exists in the US now. Medicare funds everything basically for people above 65, but it does not own the providers of those things. In other words, it does not own the doctors' practices, it doesn't own the hospitals, it doesn't employ doctors. I guess that's a better way to phrase it. So that competition is still part of the system. Doctors are still in competition with each other, hospitals are still in competition with each other. They all just have to get paid from one source. They're all competing, though, still for those patients that are out there. That's what a single payer system is. And yes, that does sound something like, what Senator Bernie Sanders would call Medicare for all. And I know that is taken on a bad connotation with a number of people, partly just because it's Bernie Sanders saying it. And I'm not usually a fan of Bernie Sanders, but I think he's hit on a grain of truth in this one. I really think the single payer system is the system that's going to work for the United States moving forward. And again, before you dismiss it, think about this. By far, the majority of Medicare patients, which includes me now, are pretty satisfied with the Medicare program. They like it pretty well. You know what you're going to get, you know what you need to do about it to get it, and they just won't cancel your coverage as private insurers do all the time. And I can tell you on the other side, on the provider side, the great majority of physicians and hospitals also use Medicare, and that's typically their primary source of revenue. And they're also reasonably happy with that, satisfied with that, particularly in comparison to private insurance. Again, as a physician, you know what Medicare will pay for, and you know what you do to have to get those payments. They don't change their own rules as the private insurers do all the time. You can do everything right when you submit a bill to a private insurer, even after talking to them in advance and them telling you, yes, this is what you need to do. Then you submit the bill, and then they just change their minds and decide they don't pay it. And there's nothing you can do about it. That does not happen with Medicare. Same thing with hospitals. And if a private insurer decides they don't like what you're billing as a physician, that you either bill too much per patient or you order the wrong things for patients, at least in their eyes, they can just decide to cancel you. In other words, not to pay you for any of their patients. What are you going to tell a long term cancer patient when that happens? That's a very difficult thing, and I've had it happen. Another way to think of this might be what a friend and colleague once told me. He stated it like this. Imagine Medicare has a pot of gold, and that's the money you get paid out of as a doctor. And they give you a map to that pot of gold. As long as you follow the directions on the map, you're going to get there and you're going to get the money. With a private insurer, the map may be an intentionally false direction. In other words, they may tell you what to do knowing that you're not ever going to get there. So that's my suggestion for event number one, that is healthcare dysfunction. Change the reimbursement system to a single payer program. The second item on my list of events influencing the MAGA versus medicine conflict is the rise of big pharma. The U.S. has just got to get the large pharmaceutical companies under some kind of more effective regulatory process so that the public will gain some degree of trust in the system. My first recommendation would be take all prescription medicine ads off the airways, off TV, off internet, off whatever, period. If we have, as a community, believe medicine should be prescribed in a controlled fashion, that is by a highly selected, highly educated, and highly regulated number of people, that is physicians, why would we think that it's reasonable to assume the public will understand advertising for these medications that are controlled? It just doesn't make any sense. The second thing I would recommend regarding big pharma is to enforce uniform pricing all over the world. The U.S. pays more on average than for many medications than most other nations do, simply because we've let them get away with it. To their credit, the Trump administration seems to have caught on to this, and I believe is trying to fix it now. So that's number two. Number three, attacks on vaccines. This is another hard one. I'm sorry, RFK Jr. simply cannot be in charge of a U.S. vaccination program as the head of the DHHS. He simply makes too many questionable statements without considering the consequences. There's many examples, but one of which that I thought was particularly interesting I heard this week is he has stated that the virus HIV, or human immunodeficiency virus, does not cause the disease AIDS. He doesn't believe that. He said that the real cause of AIDS is something called poppers, which is an inhalable gas that's used for sex, usually in gay men, but it can be used by anybody, and for getting high. And there's many other examples, as I said. Honestly, I wanted to give RFK, the benefit of the doubt because I believe in some of what he espouses, such as the importance of addressing chronic disease and healthy lifestyles. I was hoping that that would be his main focus rather than vaccines, and unfortunately, he has proven us wrong. I wanted to give the Trump administration a chance, therefore. Well, that's over. RFK has fired a number of real vaccine experts in favor of some quacks who have social or emotional axes to grind with the vaccine business. He's attacked medical journals that have led the entire world and become the best and most influential source of medical knowledge the world's ever known. And it's simply because he disagrees with them over who knows what. Enough is enough. And while I said I do support his position on chronic disease and lifestyles, I believe RFK simply has too much baggage at this point. He's now hurting the Trump agenda and MAGA more than he's helping it. Number four on our list was the COVID pandemic. The government must be honest about COVID. It must admit that mistakes were made. As much as it pains me to say it, Anthony Fauci must appear before a congressional hearing and apologize for his part in those mistakes. He's got to explain to the public the process by which gain of function research was funded and the process by which a laboratory in Wuhan, China was funded. There are actually reasonable explanations for that, but he has not tried to explain that to the public, and that needs to change. Dr. Fauci needs to come before the public in a very formal setting and explain how the NIH works, which will go a long way, I believe, toward rebuilding trust. I don't think Anthony Fauci needs to be arrested or go to prison. I'm convinced he had no criminal intent in this, and I don't believe that any of the mistakes he made rise to the level of a criminal offense. I do think he was not transparent with the public, and he needs to try to atone for that. There are others who made mistakes too, but for whatever reason, Dr. Fauci has become the face of the pandemic to the public. He's got to be the leader in an effort to rebuild the trust of the American people in our governmental health organizations. Number five on the list of events contributing to the MAGA versus science conflict is attacking or defunding science based on ideology. I've begun to suspect that most of the attacks on academics that we've seen are not coming specifically from President Trump himself, but from his staff and appointees who have suddenly found themselves in a position of power and they have some kind of axe to grind, and now they have the opportunity to do that. I really doubt President Trump has any specific argument with the New England Journal of Medicine, for example, but he's allowing his understaff to operate on their own. I believe, therefore, the president would be well served to find at least a couple of additional traditional academic medical specialists and give them some kind of oversight. Not have them making policy decisions, but have them be just an oversight body of some sort. Perhaps I'd like a trusted ombudsman or something for medical and scientific programs who would report directly to President Trump in some fashion. I think that might be the best way forward. In addition, I mentioned last week specifically the replacement for the ACIP committee and the firing of the CDC director. And I think these events honestly seem to be a function of Secretary Kennedy himself. And as I mentioned before, I think Secretary Kennedy needs to go. He's clearly done more harm than good. And these are just a few additional examples. I'm not going to expand on that anymore because I've said enough. So, as you might have guessed from what I've said so far, the underlying theme here is rebuilding trust. I've said several times in the past few weeks, the American medical establishment has lost a significant amount of the trust we once had with the American public, with our patients. Now, we just must figure out a way to interact with patients in the internet era. It's not enough anymore just to tell people what they need to do. We as physicians have to tell them why we want them to do that in ways that complement information on the internet, because they will find it. And we need to start now, because it's just going to get worse if we continue to sit on our hands or stand by or even criticize our patients because of things we say are misinformation. That's just going to make it worse. That'll polarize us even further. I admit it's going to be a monumental task. It's much harder to rebuild trust or reestablish trust than it is to lose it to begin with. It's going to take a while, but we have to try. There is no other alternative. And again, to lighten things up a little bit here, because I know it's been pretty heavy this week and last week, here's a new song that I've been listening to a lot lately that I really had a lot of fun playing also.
Give me a word, give me a sign. Show me where to look and tell me what I will find. What will I find? Lay me on the ground and fly me in the sky. Show me where to look and tell me what I will find. What will I find? Yeah. Yeah. Whoa. Heaven, let your light shine down. Whoa. Heaven, let your light shine down. Whoa. Heaven, let your light shine down. Whoa! Heaven, let your light shine down.
That song is Shine by Collective Soul, and it was from 1994. And I just thought it was really cool. Check out some of the other Collective Soul songs you find when you're looking this one up also. And that's about all we have for this week. I think our word of the week this week will be ombudsman. I haven't used that word in quite a while. You like that? You like ombudsman? You know what that means, right? Okay, we'll look it up. Any rate, so as I usually say at this point, before I get into any more trouble, please watch next week's podcast, okay? See you later.